So as we start getting into what matter is, and as we start looking at ways to classify matter, and then we'll eventually get into the phase changes of matter, all of this is important because understanding the properties of how matter behaves and how its composition is, we can make some pretty strong predictions on what outcomes to chemical reactions can be, the identity of different unknown pieces of matter, and so forth. So our starting point here is to make sure we understand that matter is anything that has a mass. So we can put it on a scale and it's going to give us a number in grams or whatever units we measure it in, and that it occupies some type of space, which means it has a volume. So when we're first looking at it, so since chemistry is the science that's going to be concerned with the properties, the composition, which means what it's made up of, and how it behaves, we need to start understanding what those terms really mean. So what is a property? When we're talking about property of matter, like what is it? So properties are traits that we can measure. So we can get some type of quantified data from it. There are two important types of properties that we start with when we're classifying matter. One is called extensive properties. So these are properties or quantities that are going to be dependent on how much of that material you have in the lab. So for instance, if I'm going to look at mass is going to depend on how much of that particular piece of material you are dealing with. So that would be considered extensive. Another example would be length. So let's say we have wire and we want to cut it to a certain length. That's an extensive property because length depends on how much of it we're going to use. Volume is another. Volume is going to depend on how much of the material we are dealing with. So those are all extensive properties. Intensive properties are qualities that are not going to depend on how much of the substance we have. So for example, color. Color of a material or color of matter doesn't depend on how much of the piece of matter you're dealing with. It's always going to be the same color. Another example would be temperature. Temperature, again, is not dependent on the amount you are working with. So those are intensive properties.